And just as economists had predicted, Nigeria's headline inflation rate climbed higher to a 17-year high, 19.4% in July, up from 18.60% recorded in June. This is according to the latest report released by the National Bureau of Statistics. The figure, which also marks the sixth consecutive monthly rise in inflation, is 2.27% higher on a year-on-year basis than 17.38% recorded in September 2005. A breakdown of the NBS data shows that Nigeria's urban inflation rate rose by 2.08% to 20.09% in July 2022 from 18.01% recorded July the previous year, while the rural inflation rate jumped from 16.75% to 19.22% on a year-on-year comparison. Both indexes were unchanged within the comparative month. Interestingly, the food inflation rate in July declined by 0.01% to 2.04% in month-on-month contrast against the 2.05% rate recorded in June 2022. And this is attributed to a reduction in the prices of basic food items such as garri, yams, maize and vegetables. Similarly, food inflation over the previous 12-month period dropped by average 1.42% to 18.75% from the average annual rate of 20.16% recorded in July 2021. The economic interpretation of the rising inflation number means that Nigerians are not able to purchase as much goods and services with their monies, as the value of their income has been eroded due to rising costs.
All right, welcome back. So to just shed some light on what you just seen, Dr. Emeka Okegu, a development specialist, joins us here in the studio. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today. Well, that certainly will worry anyone, concern lots of people, how those indices just seems to be going south. But from what you've seen over time, as a matter of fact, these figures have appeared to consistently go that way. But why is this the case, in spite of the policies that the authorities have put in place?
I'm glad you mentioned the word policy. You know, what about the programs? What about the actions?
Two different things there, right?
Yes, no, three different things.
Oh.
You know, because you're talking about policies. Policies would become your wish list. Okay, then the programs will become, you know, the process, and the actions now becomes, you know, now engaging that process. So if you look at this thing purely from the perspective of policy, then we'll still be dancing around the bonfire. Okay, but the moment you get into program and action, then you begin to probably think out of the box. You begin to get a little bit innovative. You begin to get a little bit disruptive. So what should worry us is, why are we focused on the old ways? Okay, because like you journalists will say, you do the same things over and over again, and you want to expect a different result. That's not going to be, you know, a yes. It will be a nay. So for me, first and foremost, we should be glad that we are not even talking about a stagflation or a depression, because, I mean, that would be how I would see it. Okay, because if you're looking at these figures being banded, remember you're just talking about the formal economy.
Yeah.
We've not even taken a look at the real sector, at the underground economy, at the informal sector. And this is where about 80 or 70% at least of Nigerians live. And I mean, you're talking about rural inflation at 19%, which is statistics. Remembering again that one of the major causes of even the formal, you know, economy entering into this high inflation is because people are not going to the farms, and the farms are in the rural areas. So do you have rural industries? Do you have energy? Do you have support infrastructure? So I think we're just being a little bit superficial about this. And for me, again, it begs for that question: have we gotten to where we have our backs against the wall? Is it time for us to begin to push back?
And speaking about the informal sector, I mean, I know that there's that conversation which has happened time and again, and perhaps may keep happening, how they want to formalize that informal sector. Are we able to get a proper reading of the informal sector?
Now, who wants to do this? Who wants to do this formalization? Remembering that you have 3 levels of government. Okay, is this a federal government program? Is it a state government program? Is this a local government program or is this a national program? You see, Chamberlain, we need to interrogate these things a little bit deeply, because if you look at the way we share our resources, the resources of Nigeria is actually being shared across these three sectors. And then let's interrogate the economic sustainability plan. Whose program was it? And then how does the land in your village connect to the program of Ministry of Agriculture? How do the farmers, what do we have our national food security program? Because one of the major indices, remember, of this inflation is food. Okay, high cost of, are we producing food? Are we really a food production nation? Do we have the capacity to produce? Have we been able to engage those capacities? Or do we just have people who are, doing pedestrian agriculture, if you remember, pedestrian gardening? Because if you're talking about food production for a country of 200 million people, there's no way you won't be talking about technology.
And then speaking about that in agriculture, you talk about policies not being disjointed, that if they have that proper coordination, then you could speak about having the kind of desired effect that you do want. But we also do know, when they talk about some of these policies, you hear the CBN talk about their own intervention programs, the Anchor Boros program and several other programs. You hear different state governments saying they've keyed in to that CBN's program at the national level, bringing it out to the states, and how they give the impression that it's having that effect at the state level. But now, still food inflation. So what could have gone wrong?
I think the problem is the word key in. Key in means you've joined, right? I mean, let's be elementary. Okay, when I keyed into your thoughts or your program, it simply means as a program you've announced and I think I like it and I've keyed in. But why don't we all talk about it, think about it, and then begin to juxtapose, against statistics? Let's get mathematical, all right? If you have, like we claim we have, 83 million hectares of land arable, and we are claiming or saying that less than 10% of it is in production. Now, how come we are not now making certain that we have a program that can put at least 50% of that 83 million or 73 million hectares of land into production by doing A, B, C? A, what can grow here? Yeah. What volume of land do you need? What volume of outputs do you need? Who is bringing the land? The state governments now say, okay, we are going to be bringing 10,000 each for the cultivation of cowpea. The research centers now say we are able to produce the seeds, insecticides, pesticides, fertilizers to be able to support this. Then you're not keying in. Okay, you have everybody on that table, okay, bringing something to the pattern. And it becomes a lot easier for you to now develop your KPIs, for you to be able to now, measure. And then you talk about central bank waking up and saying, okay, we're going to be throwing, and then they say to you, for you to qualify to get this loan, okay, you need to get a bank to borrow on your behalf. So you don't even have any patient capital. You don't even have any green funds. You don't even have any component of these funds helping you to do your R&D. You don't even have any of this helping you to do your feasibilities. And again, Chamberlain, it's not even enough for you to do feasibility. You need to take it to bankable feasibility. Who pays this cost? There's no funding window in our country that's able to support your thought lines. I mean, you've been on television and you've spoken to every manner of persons. So I can imagine that you have so great thoughts. But if you are to translate this into some kind of actionable program, there won't be anybody to fund it. Except, of course, you now go outside to start looking for grants. We don't have any grant programs in Nigeria. But these are the issues.
Are we discountenancing some of those? I mean, there's some industry banks that several people go to, and they get facilities in some of those areas.
They give you loans. And they give you loans, Chamberlain, that's the point. None of them will fund your feasibility. And some of the times, these feasibilities take a lot of time and energy and money. And
is that speaking to banks performing some, what we can call the core functions to ensure that industries, ideas from the very basics are funded up until a very high stage?
We don't even have banks that can do that by their licensing regimes. What you have, are money deposit banks, okay, that lend you money against what they call a feasibility. Now, because you don't have anybody who can help you fund that feasibility, 80% of the times you cut and paste, you ask Google, you put something together, and that is why the banks would say to you, bring 150% of the value of the money we want to give to you because of forced sale values. And then what are you doing with forced sale values? The idea is not to take your property and sell. The idea is for you to be able to contribute to the national food chain. So it's important to recognize where these gaps are from. Okay, and then the moment you recognize it, bridging it becomes a lot easier for us to do.
Well, we'll look at some of the statistics in rice. I know that there's always been that breakdown when you talk about states just keying in, but you wanted to see results. But they've consistently also told us about how we're performing in that area, how we're nearing self-sustainability. I know you may have seen some of the figures that have been put out time and again from the one of Kebbi, 3.5 million metric tons, Jigawa, 2.1 metric tons, Kano, 1.6, Benue, Ebonyi, 1.5. Several figures about how well they say that the figures are looking in that industry. So is that something that you can rely on?
Okay, let's drill it down. Let's assume that we're producing 20 million metric tons of rice annually. How many tons of rice does a family consume in a year? That's only when you can talk about this self-sufficiency. Okay? And how affordable is this rice? Remember that when we're importing, we are buying at 7,000, 8,000. We're self-sufficient and we're buying at 18,000. And our, what do they call it now? Basic income is 18,000 and you're buying rice at 28.30. How does that make it self-sufficient? Because self-sufficiency connotes that is affordable for everybody and every layer on every cadre or strata of citizenry. So I think what's important is that, yes, when we can say we're producing 80 million, how much do we have in our silos? Well, how much are in your strategic reserves? Because you only get self-sufficient. I mean, there are countries, that have rice that are shipping to us that are 10 years in their holds. Most of the rice we're importing, from Malaysia and the Asian Pacific have been in their holds for 10 years. Now we have 400 million metric tons capacity of silos. How much do we have in there? That's when you can begin to talk about self-sufficiency. It has to do with your strategic reserves and not your production.
All right, let's get to our colleagues in Lagos. They've got questions for you.
Thank you, Chamberlain. Doc, let me begin by asking you, are you surprised by the figures that came from the NBS? This, we understand, is a 17-year high, these inflation figures. Does the data surprise you?
Not in the list. Not in the list. In fact, I'm even surprised is just 21.52. It doesn't surprise me. And I look at the reasons that they gave. A country that is losing the amount of oil we're losing on a daily basis. We're not going back to the farms. Okay, and then you have insurrections and insurgencies, and you have, a major source of maybe what you call the most important staple in Nigeria, wheat, coming from Ukraine and Russia,
okay,
and even our energy needs. So it doesn't surprise me, and that's why I said to Chamberlain, I just hope this is an inflation. What I see is stagflation, maybe going towards a depression. Because if you're not able to produce food, and then the geese is laying your eggs is stifled, people are stealing it dry, how won't you get into a stagflation?
Now, the way you put it, Doc, only tells me one thing, that you wouldn't be the only person that has seen it coming. A number of other economists have also said, look, we are not surprised that this is happening. We saw it, coming. I assume that government also saw it coming. Could it have been avoided?
Yes, it could have been avoided if we got innovative. It could have been avoided if we stopped looking at food production as an agriculture thing. It could have been avoided if by now we had our research institutes producing greenhouses. It could have been avoided if we had every space, looking at urban agriculture. It could have been avoided if we had gotten our universities, most of them that were self-sufficiency in food production, to get engaged. It could have been avoided if we had, this round table where everybody was bringing something. Some people bringing land, some people bringing, human capital, some people bringing funds. It could have been avoided if we had aligned our fiscal policies with our monetary policies. The CBN and the Ministry of Finance and every other revenue agency would have been on a table, Now, looking at volumes, we should have been able to now put minimums. That's the point I'm making. You know, what volume, what minimum volume of cowpea do we need to be able to be, you know, sufficient for everybody to afford it, for it to be affordable.
Okay.
So a lot of these things could have been avoided if the federal government, you know, had probably stepped down a little bit to now say, okay, it's not about keying in, it's not even about buying in, it's about thinking it through together.
Okay. Well,
okay, all of us should have been on the same table now saying, okay, we'll have a national crisis. Well, so let's think it through.
And that's where one of the challenges, you know, arises, Dr. Kengu, because we've heard over and over again, you know, several people from several quarters say there is a disconnect among the ministries, departments, and agencies. And dare I say, from what you have also said, among the states. You mentioned the Economic Sustainability Plan, and what we understand from that plan is that there's supposed to be a significant partnership with the states in order for it to work. How significant is that in all of this? The fact that MDAs are said to not be working together, and that the states themselves only, it seems like government is just sending them information of what to do and not really coming into the pool to have these conversations, in the light of the fact that, as you said, it's the states that have the agricultural lands.
Again, there's even a major component you missed out. The central bank didn't even fund the ESP. I think at one time, either they withdrew their funding or they started making demands against the release of your funding. Okay, that was also a very major, and that's what I was talking about, you know, aligning our fiscal and monetary policies. All right, so it's, for me, you know, there are agencies in this country. I can tell you this, I'm involved in a program, and we're trying to do, you know, some kind of, you know, statistics on agencies or companies, you know, that produce greenhouse. Everybody is going the way of greenhouse now. A lot of countries that have, you know, gotten food sufficient have gone food sufficient by not doing rain-fed. Everybody is going, you know, technology-assisted food production. This might shock you. There's no company in this country, you know, producing greenhouses. I mean, the only agency, you know, that I know that has a program like that is PRODA in Enugu, and it is very poorly funded. Okay, so imagine if you had 1 million greenhouses, 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 or 50 in every local government producing tomato. Do you know what will happen? Producing pepper, producing chilies, producing veggies. Look at, man, we have 2 million children from the last report of UNICEF that are malnourished, and about 45% of women under childbearing age, you know, also facing malnutrition. And this is so because we're not growing food. We don't have to grow food, you know, in the soil. That's the point I'm trying to make, sir.
So perhaps that also raises, just 1 second, perhaps that also raises another crucial issue here. Just 1 second. The fact that, I mean, you have mentioned the figures now, malnutrition figures and you know, the possibilities, things that the states themselves could have done. Do the states need to wait for the federal government to catalyze and ramp up their agricultural activities?
You see, when you look at the exclusive list and what the exclusive list also says, it begins to now show you where you have these rough edges that we need to smoothen. Okay, when you also look at, you know, the relationship, the funding relationship in some things, agriculture is seen, you know, as an exclusive right of the federal government. Yes, states are supposed to be involved. In the days we were self-sufficient, we didn't have the Federal Ministry of Agriculture. Please go and check the records. Okay, and then when you have a Federal Ministry of Agriculture holding on to the ministry, holding on to the policy, holding on to the programs, and then you have states who are holding on to the land, there's a disconnect, obviously. Okay, so you don't now, you know, get those people to key into your projects. You get to sit down with them, you know, to have some kind of disruptive conversations to say, okay, this is where are we matching our population against this? Where are we matching our nutrition, you know, programs against this? And a lot of these federal agencies, by law, can't even commercialize their outputs. That's another very major challenge. And this is why you have the NASENIs, and you have the PRODAs, and you have the SEDIs, and you have all these, you know, developing technologies, and they can't market. So where do you begin to build these synergies? And what should even worry us is that we're talking about a country that has 83 million hectares of land arable. Okay, getting imports from Ukraine that is half that size in the whole population of Ukraine, I think about 20 million hectares or so in production, and just a war between them and Russia, you have this global, supply crisis. That should worry us.
Indeed, it should, Dr. Okengu, and you rightly touched on malnutrition. There was a report from one of the dailies today that talked about 84% of Nigerians being unable, to feed properly. That's a very scary number. In responding to, some of Chamberlain's questions, you raised a lot of questions about how state governments have keyed into the CBN's intervention programs or otherwise. So, and it begs the question really, when you hear the figures about the CBN's intervention programs in agriculture, particularly when they justify their decision to raise interest rates, these figures run into billions of naira. Are you also placing a question mark on the far-reaching or the wise nature of these agriculture intervention programs in states of the Federation?
Well, I've never been a fan of interventions. Okay, I rather we intervene socially. Okay, develop soup kitchens, intervene rightly. But if you must intervene in anything that is entrepreneurial, you must think it through. Okay, thinking it through means that you must be able to develop a document that assures that whatever funds you put in there are returned either by way of equity or by way of your, investments. Either you get it by return on equity or you get it by return on investments. Now, but that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is that CBN is providing money, putting it into the hands of banks, and then asking you to go to your banks to apply to CBN, and CBN guarantees these banks maybe about 85% if you lose the money or whatever. Now, you can lose all that money, and the banks won't even take the risk of even giving you the 15%. That's the truth, except you're able to produce about 150% of the value of the money you're looking for. And this is, again, another requirement of CBN. So do we need to do that when we can actually now help to do this land delineation, land identification, seeds identification, soil preparation, okay, and then be able to now get people who are knowledgeable to be able to give you support to these programs. And then you have a target going towards a national yield. You keep talking about states. States don't borrow money directly. It's the business in the states that take. So what CBN tells is that, okay, from Ogun State, we are supporting X. From Abia State, we are supporting B. From this, the only time I think they intervened directly was, I think, in the 2025, 2015, I don't know what program they called it now, but I think every state got about, 2 billion. And again, I wouldn't know how that went, but I don't think it went so well.
So Doc, how can this process be made more accountable?
Simple, very simple, ma'am. You make it accountable by making certain that whoever is getting the money is not getting it because he's able to guarantee it. He's getting it because he has the requirements to be able to get it. Requirement number 1 will be land. Requirement number 2 will be skill. Requirement number 3 will be inputs. Requirement number 4 will be where his markets, where this is where government can now guarantee. This is where the subsidies actually come in. Like in the days we had the commodity boards where, government now ensured that whatever was produced was bought up. This is where the CBN can actually intervene. And then we can begin to now have what we call this bulk that can now begin to support our industries. But for that to happen, you have to have storage. You have to have transportation. You have to have energy, okay? And then, of course, most of all, you have to have your market. So if you don't have all these things worked out and they say, okay, we're intervening, let's be able to now, it becomes throwing fire, throwing kerosene into a fire. 80% of the times, it only worsens it. You understand? You might get some little piece, some little leverage. Out of 1 million people, 10 or 2 might say to you, okay, we've gotten something. But it doesn't solve the problem on a sustainable basis. So if we are to think this through, and that's what's very critical, that's what I don't think we are doing well. Okay, if we were to think this through, the first question will be, like I said, how many tons of pepper do we consume in Nigeria every day? Just like we're talking about the PMS we consume, we should be able to know other commodities and then where they're coming from and how we can be able to, ramp up production. Vis-a-vis, are we using technology? Are we using land? Are we using rain-fed? Are we using farmers? Are we using what? That's the way to go, ma'am.
Yeah, a lot of work there, but if it's thought through and implemented, it will go a long way. Before leaving the CBN, let's not look at the MPR meeting. In the past, when inflation figures were released and we had this same narrative, the monetary policy meeting would justify its decision to raise interest rates. But then again, we're back here in September and inflation has gone up again. What do you see happening at this next meeting that is scheduled for the end of the month, and would it help to stem the rising inflation?
I think we're between the rock and the hard place now. Remember that America has also raised its own interest rates, and America has had 2 consecutive negative growths, meaning that technically America is in a recession. The euro and the pounds for the first time is doing very badly against the dollar, and we are part of this global mix, right? If they raise it, it's like there's this story about the vulture and his pregnant wife. That's actually where we are now. Vulture says, my wife has a baby, I celebrate. Baby dies, I eat the baby, I celebrate. My wife and baby dies, I eat baby and wife, I celebrate. So that's where we are now, really. We can only, for those who can pray, pray. For those who can think. But I think instead of praying, we should think more. And what we need to do, you raise it, you don't raise it. If you don't get us into productivity, and getting us into productivity is not talking about us getting into productivity, it's walking the talk. And walking the talk means that we need to go and redesign, look at how we run our things, and then, scale on some things that we're doing. We need to begin to now have a single-track, multi-dimensional approach to solving our national problems, because no matter how much the federal government wants to do, if the local governments, which are the most important component, are not directly involved in it, you're just going to be having some disruptions.
And you have rightly noted that the U.S. is in a technical recession. Speaking of which, a World Bank study revealed that, increase in interest rates by central banks across the globe may lead to a recession. Is that where we are headed? And what picture are you looking at if we're headed for a recession as well?
I'm very glad if we can end up at the recession level. I'll be very, very excited. Let's pray for recession, because I guess that we are going straight into a depression. And, the problem is that people don't see the social factors. I mean, the churches will now need to ramp up, on intervening, because there's going to be a lot of mental health issues. Okay, the government, we need to start looking at some social policies that they need to help. Now, this is the time for the government to begin to get a little bit, let's wipe their human face now, because there'll be increase in school fees, there'll be increase in bus fares, there'll be increase in everything. So you need to also be careful when you're interacting with people now, because you could just say good morning and somebody gives you a slap. Okay, that's where we're going, unfortunately. It sounds theoretical, but that's the truth. Okay, and if you notice it in the past few days, if you're driving, there's a lot of road rage. Okay, people are getting a lot more impatient with each other. So I think government should look at these things, and they're real. And I'm talking about those who are in the probably what we call the middle income. And what about those who are living in the informal sector? Those who can't go to their farms, those you can't send money to anymore. Okay, I don't know. I'm certain that as you're in this studio now, open your phones. People are asking you not for a lot of money, 5,000, 2,000. These are people that used to dash you money before. That's how bad it is. So these are going to be the very, very obvious, very, very plain, aftershocks.
One of the most shocking things so far, about this matter is that there is inflation in the rural areas where the foods come from. No, not much wonder then that what's happening in the major towns. But we'll speak more on that and a number of other things when we return from this break. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, Dr. Kengu, well, talking about, yes, we've seen all these challenges, but let's attempt to see if we could just proffer some solutions as to what can be done, because definitely we can't get out of these things. Now, demand pull inflation is what comes to mind largely when people talk about inflation, and several people have suggested different reasons. So there's a school of thought that thinks, look, that to get us out of this, it will require what they refer to as contractionary monetary and fiscal policy. Some say, look, for instance, if CBN raises the MPR, the banks will in turn make it costlier to borrow, and so when that happens, it keeps money out of circulation, and so people can be encouraged to save. You get a lot more interest on savings, and so that could contribute to mopping up and then addressing this demand pull inflation. Will that work for you?
Well, like I said, the devil is in the word borrow. There is nothing wrong with borrowing, but you need to borrow right. Okay? And borrowing right means that you have the right knowledge, the right skills, the right markets to be able to make certain that you can return the money you borrowed. So you can repay. Now, this is where we have a very big gash, right? Now, you also have a lot of agencies of government that are doing stuff, developing technologies, acquiring technologies, and they are not able to commercialize these technologies. All right? Now, you also have a lot of people who have lands inherited by their parents, farmers who are in the village, and then you have some other guys who just come into town dressed like the way you're dressed. They have cooperatives, they speak good English, and then they say, okay, we're cooperative this, cooperative A. Now, they have the kind of requirements to get those loans. They get the loans and they misapply it. Okay? So, you talked about this synergy between the fiscal and the monetary. Yes, we have to close ranks. But in closing those ranks, I think we should be able to focus on the most critical component that we need, and it is land. The moment you're able to delineate your land and then, segregate what you need for what. Okay, just like in the days you had the farm settlements. Okay, what government did was to cover these areas, and for each farm settlement, you could predict what was going to be coming out of it. Now, if you borrowed against such a program, you can now have an idea of how much you can get back. Now, because of high interest, rates I've talked about, people borrow and they go into trading. So instead of now applying the money into production, they put it into now, trading.
If you say they borrow and then they misapply it,
yes,
but aren't there supposed to be those procedures wherein they have to vet properly such that before they give you any of those facilities, they are sure that it's not going to bad.
There are two ways you borrow. There's what they call the cash flow based projections, okay, where your cash flow is the basis of lending you money.
Yeah.
This is where that happens. But what we basically do in Nigeria is that we borrow, against, you being able to secure the loan. All right, so the moment you give that security and somebody is holding on to your land, and again, there's a value of 150% on what you're giving. So it could be your father's estate, and you're looking for 200 million, and then you get somebody to value it at 2 billion. They give you 200 million for something that is worth 2 billion with a first sale value of worth 50 million. Why do you want to bother me? Do you understand? So what we need to do is to, like I said, it's not difficult to solve our problems if we are mathematical and statistical. I think the first thing is that we don't have the proper statistics. There's a lot of assumptions, a lot of presumptions, okay, of what's happening. Now, when you go to the rural areas, I give you a typical example with informal sector, or maybe what you might even call an underground economy. How come it is the people who are in the BDCs, okay, that determine the real cost and value of, forex? How come?
What is missing there?
Because we don't have production. If we had production, then it won't be there.
So the demand for forex will not be...
No, the demand for goods will not be driven, and that is what will give your currency value. Remember that at one time, everybody keeps talking about when Naira was exchanging the 70 kobo to $1. What were we doing?
We had a lot of...
we had goods, and these guys were ready to come in here. I mean, as a student, I spent Naira in London, which, then it was 7,000 or so. And there was a student rebate on Nigerian Airways. So if we're not able to understand where we went wrong. We had everybody producing here. We had Lena shoes, we had Bata shoes, we had our refineries working, we had Nesco producing biscuits, and because we had these farms, they were supplying them. I know one of my friends who is Igbo. His father used to supply grains to Jos Mills. Today, that thing is taking his name. Everybody calls him Babasuwa or something. So until we think this properly through, and it is not all about saying the federal government has done well or it hasn't. It's all about saying, okay, fine, even if you have done well, let's be able to now all sit together and try to identify these gaps. Because we're heading to these headwinds, okay? We keep flying across it, throwing money, borrowing more money. Again, maybe the issues of subsidy should come in now. And I keep saying subsidy is a production instrument. If you're not producing, you can't give subsidy. You can't subsidize what you're not producing. The moment you subsidize what you're importing, it becomes price differential.
So should we be encouraged when they say that, look, the refinery will come on stream by December this year? And so when that comes, it will largely address some of these challenges that we face today.
Well, who owns the refineries and at what cost are you producing? Why are we not talking about CNG? Why are we not talking about hydrogen cell fuels? Why are we not talking about solar?
So we shouldn't start from a low-hanging fruit as
No, the lowest hanging fruit is CNG. That's the lowest hanging fruit. The CNGs cars are all over the place. We are flaring 2.2 billion. Remember that part of what is creating this crisis in Europe is gas. And this is us flaring, 2.2 billion COVID,
Yeah, well, that's on the one hand.
Yes.
But if the Port Harcourt refinery comes on stream this year,
yes,
what will it address?
It mightn't address a lot of the factors because it won't still bring down the cost of production, except to bring down the cost of your crude. Because remember that your price.
Wouldn't it free up a lot of the demands for forex?
No, because remember that the crude doesn't belong to you technically. It's important we tell this truth. Okay, that's the truth.
Well, how do you say it doesn't belong?
How does it belong to you? Do you own Mobile? Do you have any shares in Mobile?
If we refine the crude here,
yes,
that takes away.
Beautiful. You're going to be buying from who is now producing it. Chamberlain, that's the unfortunate truth, but that's the truth. We are an oil producing nation, okay, but we don't produce the oil for our nation. Because you see, what you had when they were doing this, everybody was coming in to take oil. You had, national oil companies who had multinational oil corporations. And maybe the PIA will address it in the next 20 years, who knows? But right now, there's no move to show you that we're about to now get self-sufficient in, first and foremost, what you call the recount. Okay.
Well, I know that the cost supply side of the inflation is one of the hardest to address compared to the demand pool. But if you were to suggest, I know several people have said, look, we need to get some of these policies right. That if we do, we don't need to focus on some of those high-sounding programs that we need to achieve to get us somewhere out. That if we just put in place one or two policies, you could get some results.
I agree.
If you were to recommend one or two, what would that be?
Food production. Second one, more food production. Third one, food production. And I tell a story.
But food production has a chain.
That's what I'm saying. So the moment you have that food production, you have now unlocked a chain that is endless. Hear me? I mean, from potato, they are getting practically everything. Everything. From canning industries to transport industries to energy industries to distribution industries to everything. Just from one product, potato. So the moment you get self-sufficient in food, let me tell you, the greatest security you don't want to joke with is food security. All right? Because it begins to unlock your technology, it begins to unlock your skills, it begins to unlock everything.
Is it that there is nothing for us to leverage it? Because, I mean, even last week, I think it was Cross River State government that was talking about this, they call it vitamized rice, which is also going to add to our rice production capacity such that it will help or contribute, they say, to reducing the price of rice in the market. So that's one state alongside several other states. And they're going to have that kind of impact with the private sector.
Cross River is a very good example of somebody who is very forward-looking. Okay, like him or dislike him, Ayade is forward-looking. I've been there. I've seen some of the things he's tried to do. Okay, if we had, as a country, understood his superhighway, he was supposed to be unlocking an agricultural belt. A lot of people do not know that Cross River borders Taraba, that you can actually get from Yobe to the sea through that, superhighway in less than 9 hours. A lot of people don't know that the other side of Cross River is actually Taraba State. You can actually walk from Cross River into the northern part of the country. So it's all about us now reconnecting the belt. Now, Cross River can only do it for Cross River, and it becomes a Cross River thing. If I get my statistics right again, I think they also have a 50,000 bed poultry systems. Okay, but you're not able to support this again if you don't have the back end, and if you don't have the front end. What would the back end be? It will be the proper technologies. Okay, the front end will be your proper, off-takers. If you have us producing that amount of chicken and then you're not tying it to even the National School Feeding Program, you're not tying it to prison programs. If our company had contracts, okay, to supply food to kids in school, people in prison, they can be able to borrow money. Now, this is where the borrowing will be right.
Let's wind out with this. And this appears to be something that may have been going under the radar, the importance of human capital.
Yes.
We know that there's a lot of brain drain in different sectors of the economy. You talked about getting loans and misapplying loans. So you need the requisite skill, knowledge, and the manpower to ensure that you stem that tide. Should we be concerned about what's happening lately with that?
We are very, very concerned. And I tell you, because we're winding down, we're trying to do something with some of the universities in Nigeria. We're trying to get them to begin to get every undergraduate to get a skill. Every. I mean, if your son was reading engineering, why won't you learn how to repair car engines? They're not the same thing. Okay, why won't you learn how to fix electric bulbs or whatever? So everybody should get a skill, down to your certificate or certification or degrees. Now, we need to get back our skill centers, and you have so many of them abandoned all over the place. We need to begin to retool, but you don't retool against assumptions. You retool against needs. So in this place, we have these needs. We train nurses, somebody takes them. We train doctors, somebody takes them. We don't want to. At my age, trust me, if I had an opportunity, I'd leave, but I'm deciding I'm going to be here.
How is that work coming on? Because, for instance, I know that if there are different ways to apply that, I mean, getting the skill, different professions can also key into that such that they just leverage or get. In fact, let's hear from you. How is that coming on at the moment?
It'd be beautiful. In fact, we're getting them to it. The university is bought into one of the major universities in Nigeria has bought into it. We're also talking to even skilled. The guy who fixes, I drive a Mercedes, is so good. And I'm saying, okay, you're going to be taking a class. And you're going to be teaching undergraduates. The guy nearly started crying. He says, me, teach undergraduates? I say, yes. And the little test runs we've had has been amazing. Look at the cameras you have here. We should be able to, train technicians to not only just fix these cameras, to even begin to put them together, because you're basically talking about screens.
Because that was one of the examples I was going to give, actually,
yes,
because what we find out in schools these days is that the theories are not applicable to practice, because what you see in some of the other Western countries is the exact same items that you're using professionally is what they use in school, such that when they leave, they fit in seamlessly. And so if that gap can be bridged, it will be very easy.
No, we're doing that. We're doing that. And I tell you something, I usually tell the people I teach, in the university, I'm an associate lecturer. I say, listen, Gucci didn't go to school. But everybody is proud to wear a Fendi. These are people who didn't go to school. These are people who are just gifted. They are tailors, call them what they are. But they now put that thing, put a brand on it. And then what do? They get guys like you, good-looking guys, to wear their suits. And then somebody is looking at good-looking Chamberlain, and you're celebrating the Fendi. So you take your looks, okay, to sell a product. Now, this is the new engineering that we must begin to promote in the country. And we have so much that can
Well,
happen.
I think it's a good place to let it go, because, I mean, we need to do things differently and not yes, the government has to come up with policies, but as you highlighted it, there's some things too that can come from bottom up, such that you can now that handshake across board to get the kind of results that we do need. And I'd like to say well done.
Thank you so much.
All the best on that one. And thank you for coming on this one as well.
Thanks, It's a pleasure.
Dr. Emeka Okengu is a development economist. We will be back in just a moment. Stay with us.